do to protect your users' data when you're building applications is to require your user to authenticate themselves to basically log in, right? So that's a big part of building secure applications. Again, a lot of that happens on the server. So what do we have to do on the client side in our web apps, in our mobile apps, to work with a server that is requiring you to log in? Well, it depends. There's a lot of different ways that you can handle authentication in your server. One of the more popular ways is with JavaScript web tokens, or what we call JWT, J-W-T. So our JSON web tokens. So what happens is when you log in to some website, the server will look at your credentials, your username and password. It will create a JSON web token, and it will return that web token back to the client-side application, back to your website. So let's look at what a JWT or a JSON web token is. So a JSON web token is basically some information here that has been encrypted into an encoded token. So how this works is we take some this information here. So we've got and this all happens on your server. Again, this is not something you have to worry about right now. You're going to learn all about this when you are working with backend code. So we take in this algorithm. We tell the JWT or the JWT service what algorithm to use to encode your data, what type of token you want. Then you give it some payload, so name, subject, who the token refers to, and the time stamp. So here's our timestamp. Here's our name. Here is this is called the subject, whom the token refers to. And then we tell it how to encode your token. So how this works is this encoding part, you'll notice that we're doing the algorithm HS256, and that lines up with our encoding algorithm here. So this algorithm will take in the header here, the payload here, and a string, which can be anything. You'll notice as I'm typing, this is changing. Keep it secret, keep it safe. Probably spelled safe wrong. So this secret here, this string, is an important part of the security in the backend, in your server. Okay, so you've got this, whatever string this is, whatever you want your secret to be, something totally random that never gets pushed to GitHub. This is in a .env file. I don't know if we've talked about environment files, but I'll find something to send over to you on environment files. So this is kept in a file that is ignored by GitHub, so you don't push your secret to GitHub. And it uses this encoding algorithm plus your secret to give you a web token. So what happens when someone logs into some secure website? Let's say it's Facebook, or maybe it's your bank. Whatever service online you're using, or on your phone, you log in to their server, that server returns a token to the client. Now, what's really cool about this is now inside your website, you don't have any identifying information. Someone cannot, without this secret here, someone could come in into your browser. If, let's say you were at a coffee shop and you walk away from your computer for a minute and someone comes into your browser and grabs this token, there's no way that they can decrypt this token without your secret. And that's kept on the server, not inside the browser. So this is a way using JOTs, JSON Web Tokens, that a lot of websites keep your information secret and safe. Remember, keep it secret, keep it safe. Okay, so all that being said, we have to know what to do, how to handle these tokens, these types of tokens, right? So what happens is you log in, the web application that we're building, your React app, is going to receive a token back from the server. So let's look at the server that we are working on using today. So here's our server. So we've got just a hard-coded token. This is not a safe token. This is not encrypted. This is just a bunch of random keys that I went like that to create. So this is a fake authentication system that you will not ever use because it is not safe. All right, so we've got this fake token. When we log in with a username and password, then the server is going to respond with, so we're going to get a response back with this token. And then any other data, any other requests we want to make, like maybe we want to get data after someone logs in. That's a very well, we hit this endpoint to get further data. And there's this extra function that gets run on this endpoint that wasn't run on the logging in endpoint. So you'll notice the logging in endpoint takes in the endpoint and then just jumps right to the final callback here. But this one takes in the endpoint, an extra function, and then the callback. So what type of function do we know about that intercepts some process and does something with the data that's flowing through that process? What is that type of function called? Middleware, yes, Christopher. Oh, Winnie, you tried, sorry. Eric waited for you. Middleware, yeah, look at this. We have a middleware function that's being run on this endpoint, not this endpoint. So let's go look at what happens when this server receives a GET request at this endpoint. It's going to invoke this authenticator function here. So this authenticator function is going to look at the request headers. It's going to pull off the authorization request header. And if the authorization header is equal to whatever token was created, then it's just going to call next, which means move from here to the next thing. But if the authorization token does not equal the token that was created here, then it's going to respond with a status 403 and an error saying user be logged in to do that. User must be logged in. This has happened like through the last 5 or 6 cohorts. So there we go. I'm going to finally fix that. Don't worry, you don't have to pull these changes or anything. You're just going to see user be logged in instead of user must be logged in. User be logged in. So again, if we make a request to /API/data, and it flows, that request will flow through this middleware. If we don't have an authorization token, or if our authorization token doesn't match what the server has, then we're going to get an error. In fact, we can see this happen. Let's see, this is running on, where's our port? Port 5000. Is that what it said there? Yeah, port 5000. So we can go http:// localhost 5000, and then let's go look at the endpoint. So the endpoint was /API/data. So we're going to try and get our data by making a request to this endpoint, but we're not going to have our authorization header. So this should fail. User be logged in. So let's open this up and let's look at the request that actually happened. Let's go to the network. We made a request to localhost /5000/API/data. We got the status code 403, and we got an error message that we have to be logged in to retrieve this data. And that's because on our request headers right here, oh, I collapsed them. On our request headers, there's no header called authentication with a token as the value. So we need to make, in order to make this request and get our data, we have to add an authorization header to our request. So today we're going to talk about how to handle authorization headers and this authentication process with tokens. And then we're going to implement protected routes that will check to see if we have a token before we can even route to different components. Okay, we're going to do all of this inside this code sandbox. This should be the forked one. Yep. So let me pass this on to you. Michaela's probably answered this very well, but what are endpoints? That definitely can be intimidating. So let's do this real quick. So here's a project we were going to do yesterday. It's actually a pretty cool project where we are getting the photo of the day, NASA photo of the day, but you can choose which day to make a request to. So the styling needs to be cleaned up. That's ugly. All right, but that's beside the point. So let's look at where the request is happening. So here's our Axios request. Here is the base URL. It's whatever the website looking string is, all the way to the domain. So .com, .gov. For this request, the base URL is localhost :5000. So there's my base URL. Whatever comes after the base URL is the endpoint, all the way, and if there's a question mark, it's whatever's between the base URL and the question mark. So the endpoint is this part right here. Okay, so how does this work? We've got our base URL, so that when our browser makes this GET request here, it knows where in the world to travel to get to that server. So this gets us, this is the address for the server. This gets us to the server. So then we make our request, we go knock on the door of our server, and the server house butler opens the door, and we say we would like to retrieve data from this endpoint, from the planetary/apod endpoint. And the butler will check a few things like the API key and the date, or maybe there's an authentication token. And based on that other information, will give us data or will send back an error message. Okay, so when we're doing this request here, when we go localhost :5000, this travels to the little node server that we spun up on our computer, and we get to the server house. We knock on the door. The server butler opens the door, and we say we would like the data at this endpoint here. We would like to make a request, a GET request at this endpoint. So in our server, you'll notice that this endpoint here matches what comes after the base URL in our request. So the base URL gets us to this point. The GET request and the endpoint tells the server to run these functions right here. So that's what endpoints are. We're going to talk a little bit more about that tomorrow when we talk about domains and all of this stuff. But I think that's important to bring up right now, so we understand a little bit of how these requests are working. Okay. What were we doing? All right, so let's jump into authentication. So we're going to learn how to use Axios, a new Axios instance, to handle authentication with tokens. But first, let's take a look at questions and take a quick break. Okay, doesn't look like there's any questions in the queue. So let's go ahead and take a fiver. I'll see you back in 5 minutes. Okay, come on back. Sorry, I probably deafened you when I shared the music. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, a couple things that I noticed back here, some questions. So this server repo that I sent you to right here, it has the package.json already. So all you have to do is with the dependencies that we need. So all you have to do is when you clone this, you don't have to fork it. You can if you want, or you can just clone it straight down. Run yarn install or npm install to install the 4 dependencies, and then yarn start. So I already had the dependencies installed. So I navigated to the server and ran yarn start. But if this is your first time downloading this or cloning this, which I assume it is, you'll have to download the dependencies with yarn install or npm install, or just yarn. So you should be up here. You should see this server listening on port 5000. And you should be able to go to this endpoint here and see that error message. Actually, let's just make this clickable link. So you should be able to click on that link and see either the raw JSON, or if you've got the browser extension, you should see this error here. So if you see this error, then you know that your server is working. All right. We can get rid of those. We can get rid of the NASA. Let's keep that up. .env I'm going to put over here. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about how to handle authentication with tokens. So in our component here, you can see that we've got a login page and some protected page. But our protected page is not currently protected. We want to protect this page and the data that will be fetched when we route to this page behind this authentication system, behind this login system. So let's take a look at this app real quick. If we go to app.js, then you'll see that we're using React Router, and we're using this switch component. If you haven't learned the switch component, this is just another way that you can build your routes without using the exact. So we actually don't need exact on here. And what's going to happen is this is like a switch statement that we use, a JavaScript switch statement. It will look at one line at a time until it comes up with a match for whatever website, whatever site URL you're looking at. So for this one, we got to /login and we rendered the login page. And then this is the catch-all here, just takes us back to login. If we do something that's just totally random, it will still take us to the login page. Or normally this would be like a 401 error page saying, oh, that endpoint, this URL is not found. Please go back to where you were before. Okay, so that's the switch component. So we've got our three routes here. We've got a protected route. So when we go to /protected, it opens up the gas prices component. When we go to /login, it'll open up the login component. And if we go anywhere else, it will also open up the login component. And then we've got our 2 links to take us to login and protected. So let's go into the login page and let's talk about how we send a request and get our token back from the server and what to do with it. So in components, we're going to go to login, and we'll see that we're in a class component, so we can practice with classes. And we've got just a simple form with some inputs. Our 2 inputs are controlled by this credentials object and this handle change function. So when we type into one of the inputs here, we are going to call this .setState and update the credentials object. We spread in what's already inside the credentials object, and then we update whichever field we're on with the new value. So we can type into either of these, and we have 2 controlled inputs now. So then our form has this submit handler, which will invoke this login function. So this is where we're going to start. We want to log in to retrieve the JOT token. I always call it JWT. I think the official pronunciation of JWT is JOT. To retrieve the JOT token. JWT just seems a lot. It seems like that would be pronounced JWT. I don't know. Okay, so we're going to log in to retrieve the JWT token. We're going to add the token to local storage. And then we're going to route to /protected, or whatever landing page you want to create for your components. For this one, it's ///. All right, move. A lot of times this would be like a dashboard or a profile page. So once you log in successfully, get the JOT token and add the token to local storage, or handle it. Maybe you're using Redux and you want to keep the token in your state or something like that. After you authenticate the user, then you route them to whatever landing page you want. Okay, so to log in, we're going to make an Axios request. Where you can see that Axios is here as a dependency. So we've imported Axios up here. We're going to do axios.post because we need to send in this body of data to our server. So axios.post, we need the base URL and the endpoint. So we're going to say http:// so many things are happening. There we go. Localhost. What am I doing? http:// localhost : 5000. So that's the base URL. That will get us to the server. And then we need to tell the server which endpoint we're trying to make a request to. So if we go back to our server page here, we're making a post request. So we want to make a post request to /API/login. Got our base URL. We've got our endpoint. So our URL string is now built. And now we need to send in the body of data. So let's go look at our server and see what our server is expecting. So the body is going to be an object with at least a username and a password on it. And the username is going to be Lambda School, and the password is going to be I Heart Lambda. For me, I've got that saved in here. for you, if you don't save your forms, this is going to be the same credentials you'll need for your afternoon project. So if you want, after you clone your afternoon project, if you want, go and edit the, you can do this just in your code editor. Go into the server.js file and just edit the credentials to something a little shorter. That will really help speed up your development time, so you're not having to type this in and this in the whole time. So pro tip there for you, you can change the credentials for a little bit faster development. Okay, so we're back here at this post request. We're making a post request to this endpoint. We're passing in an object with the username and password. Luckily for us, we've got an object with a username and password on it. This is very normal to have in your state that's controlling your form, some object with whatever you need to send down to your server, so that all you have to do is call that object in your post request. Makes it really easy. All right, let's log the response we get. And then we'll see if we get any errors as well. So go ahead and add this post request to your project, to Code Sandbox. And then in a second, once you have that done, jump to the web app and let's make that request. Okay, I'm going to open up my console. I'm going to make my request. And, oh, something. Let's go look at the network request. Something happened here that it timed out. Errored out. So let's look at the preview, 405 not allowed. http:// my computer doing this. Someone probably already said ://. Oh, I did. Don't forget the colon. Yep, thank you, thank you. All right, I knew that looked funny. I was looking at it thinking, oh, this looks weird. Okay, so now we'll try again. And we can go to our console and we can see our data. So res.data.payload has our token, res.data.payload. So inside my .then, I'm going to do localhost, local storage, .set item, and I'll just call this token, and I'll pass in res.data.token. This works without stringifying it because it's already a string. If this was an object, if we just wanted to pass in res.data, then we would have to do json.stringify like that, since res.data is an object. But we're just going to store the token, the string, inside the browser local storage. So let's go back to our app. Let's clear out everything here. Let's open up application, the application tab, and the local storage. Okay, nothing on it. So we'll go ahead and log in. Uh-oh. Something happened. Is this making a request? Preview. Oh yeah, we took away the console log. Ah, not dot token, dot payload. Dot payload. So let's try that one more time. Looking at our application, we're going to log in. There we go. Now we've got our token on local storage. Again, the token is encoded, and you need a string to do anything with it. So while putting this on local storage does expose this to anybody that's on your computer, this isn't going to really be a security risk having your token here. So just a heads up on that. I know that can look concerning, but this is a pretty normal way to handle tokens. All right, the next part, so we've logged in, we've retrieved the JOT token, we've added the token to local storage. Now we want to route to our protected page. So let's see. Help me out here. How do we route to our protected page again? What are we going to do to route? Winnie's quick on the draw on that one. What do we need to do to route to /protected? Not switch, not Axios. History.push, yes. History.push. Yeah, we're going to redirect them. Okay, so we're going to use the history object. This is a class, so we need to refer to this .props .history.push, and we'll go to /protected. Good. Got to think back to all that router stuff that you learned so long ago. Have to remember all those. Let's make sure we have the history object coming to us on props. So if I'm looking at this, at the app component where my routes are defined, what inside here would tell me that I have the passed down. So what inside here is going to tell me that I do have history as a prop to log in? Okay, the route, what about the route? So let's go look at the login route. So here's the login route. What about the route? This component makes it so that I have this .props.history. Yeah, the component prop that we're using to render the component. Remember, if you, in your routes, when you use the component prop and pass a component down to it, that component automatic the history match and the location objects pass down to it. I have no idea why my computer keeps doing that. Sorry. If I get muted and you guys miss something important, let me know. So yeah, let's take a look at our React tools here. So if we go to our login page, we should see the history object, the location object, and the match object. All of these passed in as props because we're using the component prop on the route component. Awesome, great job. So yes, we are going to use the history object to route to /protected. So let's go try this. I'm going to click login. It worked. Yay. Get my next break, I'm going to try and reconfigure this and just use my computer keyboard, not my USB keyboard and mouse, because I think that's causing the problems here. All right, perfect. So we've got our login part done. Now we need to make a request when we route to gas prices. We need to make a request to retrieve the gas prices from our server. So let's go look at our server. We want this data here. So data is coming from the data file. So if we go to the data file, we see all the data that we want, and this is a huge list of data. This is what, 14,000 lines worth of data. And what this data is, as we can see here, it's a gas price comparison over time between the continental US and Hawaii. So if we look at the data, there it is, we'll see that we have an object with a gasoline type. So there's regular, mid-grade, premium, and diesel. We have a location, a date. So this is January 1st, 2006. For the US, for those different types of fuel, and then the price. And then once we get through all the types of fuels, then we see the same date and the same data for the state of Hawaii. And then we see for the island of Honolulu, Wailuku, Hilo, and I think that's the last one. Yep, now we're back to the US. So then we go to February 1st, 2006, and we get the same information for all the same locations for February 1st for that same date, all the way down to July 1st, 2012. So we've got a lot of data. Next question. I see how we use switch for protected routes. How do we set up routes that conditionally render different content based on the user's authentication? For example, when you go to /login, when it's logged in, redirects you to / or a dashboard. Similarly, when you go to protected, it redirects you to login. We'll talk about this a little bit with our next objective, using protected routes, and then we can talk about the opposite way. So we'll talk about how to redirect users to login if they're not authenticated, and then that's what we'll learn today, and then we can briefly discuss the opposite view, takes you to the / if you're logged in already. Okay, can you repeat the component prop thing again? Yep, so when we're using React Router, right here, any route that you are displaying, there are two different ways to render your route. You can use the component prop, or we could use the render prop and actually render the component like that. So both of these work to render a component. When you use the component prop this way, then the component prop automatically passes in the match history and location objects to props as props. But when you use the render prop, you can see there's no props being passed in. So we need to pass those in like this. So with the render prop, you have to do it manually here, and that this props object has the history the location, and the match objects on it. And now that would pass those all into our login component. If you use the component prop, it does that automatically for you. All right, let's take a break and we'll be back in 5 minutes. All right. By the way, here is a Medium article on environment variables, the .env folder that we were, or file that we were talking about. So you can read up on that and kind of get ready for some when you get into the backend code. If the render prop, like this one. Nothing but a white screen. All right, hold on. Is that better? Okay, cool. Let's turn the music down so I don't blast your ears, or turn the sound down. Okay, whew. All right, render prop. So / with render, pass in props manually. And versus the component prop. With component, passes in props magically for you. Now the props we're talking about here are just those 3 props from router: the history prop, location prop, and match prop. If you need to pass in other props, then you have to use the render prop here and pass those in yourselves right here. Other props. And this would be something that you pass in. So when I'm talking about props here, I specifically mean those 3 props that that React Router gives us. Okay, so there is the new switch statement. There you go. All right. So we're able to log in. We get routed to /protected. So let's go to that component that's being rendered there, the gas prices component. We see that we've got some state with gas prices. Inside component did mount, we're calling this .getData, which is this function right here, which isn't doing anything yet. When we render the component here, we first, inside the render function, we first run this function here. This is pretty common practice to do something inside the render before you return your JSX. So we're going to run this .format data to get gas prices. And then our gas prices are what we're going to render here for all of our different years. So what does format data do? It looks at the gas prices that's on state, which right now is an empty array. And for each of those, it's going to format each object into a smaller object with the date, the US price, and the Hawaii price. So let's go fetch our data and add it to state so we can go through all this and render this cool looking chart. All right, again, when our component mounts, we're going to call this function here, and inside here, we want to fetch data from the server. The data is protected behind a token. So our request needs to include an authorization header. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to build a module that takes the Axios object, and we're going to call axios.create to create an instance of Axios function. Let's go to our code here, and let's build a utils folder. And inside utils, we're going to build Axios with auth.js. Okay, now that you've got your Axios with auth file up, we need to import Axios from Axios. Then we're going to create and export a function. So we're going to say export const Axios with auth. This is going to be a function that eventually will return an instance of Axios. So we use the create function here to return a new instance of Axios. Now what's cool about this is with the create function, we can pass in a configuration object. And if we look at Axios, at this configuration object that we can pass in here, there's a lot of we can pass in. Base URL, we'll look at in a second. Headers, we need an authorization header with a token, right? So we'll probably use that. The rest you can look at params, data. You can use the date function to pass in your data rather than passing it in with your request. Where is Axios? You can give it a specified timeout. You can give it an authentication, username and password, whole bunch of different things you can do with this. Cancel token in case you want to cancel a request for some reason. So today we're going to learn about the base URL option and the headers option. So let's talk about the base URL option first. We've got the base URL option here. Now with this, we can pass in a base URL, which we've talked about, which is this right here. In fact, I'm just going to copy and paste that into my base URL. And now, anytime I use this instance of Axios, it's going to put in the base URL automatically for me. So let's go back to our login and let's use this instance, Axios with auth, rather than Axios, and see what it does for us. So we're going to say import Axios with auth in our login file. So we go back to utils and into. So what is this that we're importing? Whatever's being exported here. So this is a function that returns Axios instance. So if we call this function, and it Axios. So instead of saying post, we're going to call this function and then post of that function call. And now, since we have the base URL built into this instance here, and our Axios with auth instance, we'll add that to the front of of every request we make with this instance. Isn't that awesome? No more writing that for every single request. If you only put base URL into this instance, it is still totally worth it. So you don't have to have that on every single request. Makes it look so much nicer. In fact, look at this. If you look at this, .post, invoke a function. So .post parenthesis string. Check this out. .post parenthesis string. That exactly matches now what we have in our React app. Kind of cool. It's a lot easier to see, to make that connection of what's going on. Okay, so let's go make sure that worked. So I'm gonna go to my login page. I'm gonna watch my network tab. Clear everything out here, click login. Uh-oh, something happened. Let's see what our request was. Well, that's not good. That didn't do anything I just told you it would do. Okay, let's see. Axios with auth returns this. By all accounts, this should be working. Base URL. I think we may just need to refresh this app here, maybe. Let's see. Nope, still not working. Let's try this. Let's see. Maybe one of you see what I'm doing. Ah, thank you. Yes, yes. Oh man, okay. Misspelling errors are the worst. Uh, 45 points to Joe. Thank you very much. Now we should be able to log in, and there we go. Now it made the correct request for us. Ah, so nice to have that. Whew. Okay, but we also know that when we are making our request for our data, that we need an authorization token header. So we're gonna add headers to this config object as well. Headers is an object with the list of headers that you want to add. So inside here, we see content type, application JSON. That's already there. If we go look at this request, the request header already has content type, application JSON. So with Axios, this is already default. So we don't need that one, but we are going to use authorization. And technically, you don't even need these strings. You need it for content type because of the hyphen here. A hyphen without being inside a string is not correct syntax in JavaScript, but it works fine in our requests. So you can see some of the request headers have that dash. So if you've got that hyphen, then you have to add that string. Authorization doesn't have the hyphen, so we technically don't need that string. authorization. And this could either be, this could be capitalized or lowercase. You'll normally see it capitalized in your front end code just because they're all capitalized as the request goes out. So I keep that capitalized. Now we just need our token. Where are we going to get our token from? That's crazy. Yeah, go Gryffindor. So where are we going to get our token from? Local storage. Yes, exactly. Beautiful. And so what I'm going to do is just create a const token here. Just to, you could do it right here. You could say local storage.get. I'm going to do it right here. I don't know why. I have no explanation as to why. So I'm going to get my item token. Now again, remember how we had to stringify our local storage data if it was an object? We're getting a string so we don't have to parse it. But if we did need to parse this, then we would say json.parse and wrap the whole thing inside that call. But since we're just dealing with a string, we're okay to do it like this. All right. Now the question is, we just added this to our Axios with auth instance. So when we log in, is that going to mess up our login? And luckily it doesn't. We can continue to use Axios with auth. And if token, if we hadn't retrieved a token and this was a undefined, this wouldn't mess up our request at all. So in fact, let's try that out. Let's go to application. We're going to clear our local storage, go to login, go to our network tab, not performance, network tab. Clear everything here, log in, and you see it still works. So it wasn't even added, or the request header, maybe it was, yeah. Authorization null, doesn't matter for our login, right? But now we got our token back. It's set onto local storage. So now any request we make will have that authentication header. So let's go to gas prices. Let's fetch our data from our server. So we don't want Axios, right? We want Axios with auth from our utils and Axios file. Okay, now I want you to spend a couple minutes here to use this module to make a request to our server. So the endpoint is going to be /API/data. So make a request to get that data. Let's see, fetch this data and add the response, the array of gas prices to state. So that is your task for the next, we'll say 5 minutes. Fetch the data here using our Axios with auth module. Here's your endpoint. Take the data that you get back. There's an array somewhere in there. Take that array of data and add it to state. You're gonna see a weird, we're not quite done at this point. We won't quite be done. We gotta do one more thing. So the data will look weird when you add it to state and it renders, but we'll fix that in just a minute. Okay, I will see you back in 5 minutes. Okay, go ahead and finish up in the next 20 seconds or so here. And when you are done, whoa, scrolling, post Code Sandbox links here. So we can check those out. Okay, we've got a couple posted here. Do we need more time for everybody else? Just answer with a yes or no emoji. Or a yep. Okay, we're getting a few more here. Let's go one more minute. Okay, a few more people have rolled in here. Let's see. Let's take a look at Dakota's randomly chosen from the list. So we're going to go into components, gas prices. All right, this is looking good so far. So we've got Axios with auth. We use that module. Remember, calling this function creates a new instance of Axios, which gives us our base URL and our authorization header. So good, we call Axios with auth. We call .get, pass in our endpoint. In our .then, we're going to call this .set state. We're going to update gas prices with res.data.data. And then if we have an error, we're going to console log the response. Awesome, yeah, that looks really good. 30 points for Dakota and 20 points for everybody else that shared a link here today. Great job. Let's go build it together real quick. So as Dakota showed us, we're going to use Axios with auth. We're going to call .get and pass in the endpoint /API/data. One thing that you might see when you're setting up base URLs like this, you may see people add /API here so that you don't have to add /API on every call. that would make it a little different than what you see here. There's ways to set it up on your server end as well to do just this slash. So kind of depends. That's kind of a personal preference at that point, how you want to set it up. But just a heads up, you may see some people set it up with /API here. And then you would just have /data, or they might even do /API/ and then you just have get data. So lots of different ways to set that up. I'm going to keep it here since that's where we started today. Okay, so we're going to get our data. We're going to call .then. And Dakota showed us that our data we want is at res.data.data. We're just going to console log it so we can see it ourselves because we don't trust you. Just kidding. Just to see it. I'm so funny. All right, error.response, and this should format for me. Perfect. And let's go to our network request. Data. Very nice. Okay, so it didn't actually end up posting here because we need to do a little bit more formatting. So res.data, res.data. Maybe it isn't res.data.data. Maybe it's just res.data. Let's go see. Oh wait, sorry. We need to go to the console log. There we go, res.data.data. Yep, you were absolutely correct. Res.data.data gets us our array of 1,500 gas prices. So, oh, of course it didn't render anything. We haven't done this .set state. Okay, so we've got our gas prices state needs to have res.data.data. Now it should render something like that. Cool. And you'll notice that the dates are all going to be way off, or the dates are all going to be there. The years are going to be way off. There's some that kind of stretch beyond where they should. And this is way longer than we want it to be. So what we want to do is we want to format it so we only get US continental prices for regular gasoline and state of Hawaii prices for regular gasoline. So this is what we're going to do. There's a number of ways you could do this. You could do this right here. You could do your filtering and data manipulating right here. I'm going to say const prices equals res.data.data.filter. And we're going to look at one price at a time. Don't worry, I'll give you this block of code. And we want to say only keep this price if, I need to look at my solution code here. I'm going to cheat. Okay, only keep this if the price dot type equals gasoline dash regular, and if the, now we're going to do, so there's one check. So if our object in this long array is gasoline regular, and if it's either from the US or from the state of Hawaii. So since I'm going to do an or check for my second check here, I'm going to wrap this in a set of parentheses. So it's going to check this logic, and it's going to check everything inside this set of parentheses. So inside this set of parentheses, we want to see if the location is equal to the US or if it's equal to state of Hawaii. Now we're going to set our gas prices data with prices. I actually think this would be called, I would normally call this like formatted prices. So when I look at this, when I look at my set state, I can say, oh, I formatted something. Okay, let's go see what was formatted and how. And now when we have that, and we render, now we're just getting a comparison all the way to 2012, 1 month at a time, between the continental US and state of Hawaii. Kind of an interesting graph there. And yes, I did all the styling manually. So you can take a look at that if you want to play around with that. Okay, last part here. Oh, let me give you, let's see. I'm going to go ahead and give myself a weird flex. That was a weird flex there. Flex, if I could spell it. Weird flex, but what does it say? Weird flex, but yeah, or something. Okay, so here is my final Axios with auth call. There we go. With the formatted prices, checking to make sure it's regular and that the location is either US or state of Hawaii. All right, the last part of this is learning how to implement protected routes with an authentication token. So what we've done up to this point really is all you have to do for security on the client side when we're dealing with authentication. But if you want a little bit more protection, then we can build what's called a private route component. And so let's go ahead and build this out. So we're going to have React, import React, not equals, import React from React. We're going to have our private route. Is going to take in some props. And it's going to return some kind of JSX. And then we're going to export default private route. Okay, go ahead and get your private route component set up like this. And we're going to import this into our app where we have our list of routes. So we're going to import private route from /components/private route. Now, any route that you want protected, like our protected route, instead of rendering route, we're just going to replace that with private route. And now our private route, we're going to build out this component following a couple rules to make it so that if you're not logged in, if you don't have a token on local storage, you won't be able to go to this endpoint. It's going to redirect you automatically back to login. Again, you're not going to be able to fetch data even if you don't have this private route set up. So you don't, this is just kind of the cherry on top. It's not super necessary, but it is a pattern that you're going to see pretty often. So we're gonna talk about it just kind of briefly today. And you can decide as you're making your projects whether or not you want to use private routing or not. All right, so let's go ahead and go into our private route component. So there are some rules here that we have to follow when we're building the private route component. And those rules are listed here in TK. So I'm going to grab those and I'm going to say private route rules. All right, rule number 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so the first rule when we're building this component is it has to have the same API as a route component. Well, what does that even mean? APIs are these, right? These servers? Not always. What does API stand for? First of all, let's talk about what API means, and then we'll talk about what it means in this sentence here. So what does API mean? What does it stand for? By the way, thank you, Michaela, for posting this. If this is ever a problem beyond today, now that you've seen this, so if this becomes a problem, we'll just take away questions in Slido completely. So I can just teach for 2 hours straight, not take any questions, and we can run Classroom that way if this continues. So please do not spam Slido, do not harass my moderators, your wonderful TLs who do an awesome job at helping us keep Slido clean. Thank you. Okay, yes, application programming interface. So that's what API stands for. And basically what that means is the way that two applications interface with each other. So for example, our browser, our React app is interfacing with our server. So we call this an API because it interfaces with client-side applications, other servers, databases, etc. Lots of different applications. So thinking about that, it doesn't have to be browser to server to be API communication. It can just be any kind of application thing. So how would we interface with components? This says that that a private route has to have the same API as route. So let's go look at our routes. How do we interface with custom React components? I beat you, Winnie. How do we interface with custom React components? How do we interface with components? Yes, 30 points for Eric. Through props, we're going to communicate or interface with our route component through props. So when you hear something, when you hear people talk about APIs, when you say the API of this component is set up like this, or private routing, that the private route component has to have the same API as route, then they're talking about how you interface with that thing, with that module. And for React components, that's through props. So when we see this, when we see that a private route component has to have the same API as route, what we're saying is it has to accept the same props as a route component does. So you can see here we're rendering private route and we're passing in path and component. This has to also take exact if we needed it to, and any other components, any other props except render. So I'll show you why in a second. We're not going to use the render prop for this. Just going to use component. Okay, so let's go to our private route. So we're taking in props. Let's look at this second thing to talk about how we're going to make this first rule happen. So the second rule is that we have to render the route component and pass all the props through to it. So we need to import route from React Router DOM. Okay, we're going to render the route component. And now we need to pass all of our props down to it. Okay, so now private route can accept any prop that route could, and it will just pass all those props straight onto the route. We're going to change this up in just a second after we look at this third thing. So what's this third thing? This third thing is going to render the component prop that was passed down to it. So here, inside app, we render private route. We pass in component, which is going to be whatever component we want it to be. So we could do something like this and have another component. And we would render private route at another route and another component. So we need to be able to take any component that's passed down to the component prop and render that inside private route. Okay, so we're going to do some logic here, some JavaScript logic to check to see if user is authenticated. So we need to use the render prop for that. And instead of just automatically rendering a component like gas prices here, we're going to use this function to do some JavaScript. So how do we check to see if user is authenticated? Well, we're going to see if local storage dot get item, grab our token. We're going to see if that is truthy. If that's truthy, we're going to render our component that we pass into the component prop. So this is where things get a little tricky because the component that we have to render here is on props.component. And we know if we try to render this, we're going to run into an issue with this being lowercased. So we need to somehow change this component to being capitalized. So we're going to say const component equals props.component. All right, so now we can say component and then pass all of these props in from right here. All right, we still have an issue though. Props still contains component, the component prop. So when we spread all these props in, we're going to get component equals props.component, and we're going to get this render component here, this render prop here. But check this out. If we go to React Router, if we go to the docs and we look at the route component, and we look at the render methods, so we get component prop, render prop, and children are the 3 different ways we can render a component. Then we see this, you should only use one of these props on any given route. Uh-oh, we're using 2. By spreading in props, we're using component and render. So we need some way to do this while also removing props.component out of this object here. So we're going to do some really fancy JavaScript right here to accomplish this. So first we're going to destructure our props object, and we're going to pull component out of that object. And so we no longer have this, but we need this named with a capital C. So we're going to say, we're going to rename our component prop to component with capital C. So this does the same as what we just had here. So we needed this, right, to get this. Well, we can accomplish that right up here with that line. So we're going to take that out. Actually, let's just comment that out. Now we need the rest of our props to spread into here. So we're going to use the spread operator to capture all the rest of the props that are passed in into an object called rest. Now we'll spread in rest, and we're spreading in all the props that are passed to private route except component. So this is a way to just take the entire props object, pull component out of it, rename it with a capital C so we can render it in JavaScript or in JSX, and gather all the rest of those props that were passed down into this object here. This is confusing. The nice thing about private route is pretty much all of this, except the logic inside here, is syntax that you just use over and over and over again. You could just take this exact component into any project, paste it into that component, and then just change the logic inside your render prop. So you don't have to 100% understand what's happening here. It'd be advantageous probably to study to try and figure this out and build a mental model for this syntax, but this is pretty advanced JavaScript syntax for what's going on. So don't stress over not understanding this. This can be one of those points that you just reuse this code, and then as you learn more about JavaScript, slowly start to understand what we just did. Okay, so let's take a look at this. It has the same API as route. That's accomplished here. It renders a route right here and passes all the props through to it right there. Checks to see if a user is authenticated. Okay. If they are, it renders the component prop right there. If not, the last part we need to do is redirect the user to /login. So if they're not authenticated, if there's no local storage, no token in local storage, we're going to use this really cool component called redirect. This comes from React Router DOM, so we need to import it there. And what this says is if this ever gets rendered on the DOM, then it's going to redirect the user to wherever we want them redirected to. Why do we got squiggly lines? Oh, because we need to say return in front of here. Miley woke up. Good morning, Miley. I'll get you out in a second. Okay, so let's go see if this works. What should happen is if I remove my token and I refresh my page at /protected, it should take us directly to login. Yes. And now if I try to route, if I click to protected page, it won't even let us render that component. It's just going to only redirect us to login because we don't have that token. So we log in to get our token. We've got our token, and we render our page. Okay, that is it for today. I know, Miley, we're almost done. She's making sure that you all get out to lunch on time today. So we talked about handling authentication with tokens with our Axios instance. And we talked about implementing protected routes using the authentication tokens and redirect to protect any protected routes that we have. Today, you're going to build a friends application. So you've got a server here that you're going to have to fire up and run. You've got a token. You've got a list of friends. You've got an authenticator middleware that's going to check when you do your GET request, when you do a GET request to a specific friend with a specific ID, a POST request to add a new friend, a PUT request to edit your friends, that you can edit your friends, didn't know if you knew that, or delete your friends. If you want to delete your friends, you could do that as long as you're authenticated. So if you have the correct token, you can edit and or delete your friends. True story. Okay, and then the login endpoint, of course, does not flow through the authenticator middleware. So today you will be building an application that gets a list of friends. You'll have a login form like we had today. Again, you can change the username and password on the server if you'd like, so you don't have to type this in all the time. The MVP for this is going to be able to log in and get a list of friends to display inside a private route. Protected route is private route, same thing. Then create another form to collect data for a new friend. So you'll have a login form, you'll have a create new friend form, and you'll be able to make a POST request using your authentication token to add a new friend to your list. Joe is added as a friend. You're welcome, Joe. If you'd like to, if you finish with that, you can move on to stretch problems to make a put request and a delete request, which we're going to learn on Thursday, but you can jump ahead with those today. Then styling, and then expand properties that you would want on your data. If you end up doing this, you'll have to change the dummy data on the server. All right, that is it for today. Let's check out questions. We've got a few questions in here. Feel free to jump off for lunch if you'd like. Otherwise, we'll take a look at these questions. This is a great question. Can you always parse and JSONify local storage to be safe? Absolutely. I think that's a great idea, actually. Is it possible to use the fetch API instead of Axios for authorization? Yes. Or does Axios have specific methods that are useful when authenticating? So what I like about Axios is being able to make this configuration. I believe with fetch, you can probably do the same thing. Fetch API. So let's see. Headers. How do we do this? There's not any good examples here. You can also use, let's go to examples. Here we go. Okay, so you can append headers like this, and then make your request. Let's see. So what is my headers is new headers. I just want the fetch API. So let's go back to the fetch API. Oh, here we go. This is gonna be better. Okay. This isn't gonna be super helpful. We'd have to take a little while here to figure out how to do this with a fetch request. So when you make your fetch request here, content type, response, no. Supplying your own request object. Okay, so you can kind of do this a similar setup with new request object. And you can see that you pass in the URL here and a config object, which is this right here. And then your headers can be created with the example we saw below. So one of the problems with the fetch API, it's got all of the same functionality, but the problem is the documentation isn't quite there. So some better documentation comes from Dan Levy, our very own need Axios. So I wonder if he may have some better examples here. Oh, come on. Custom headers. So here you go. This will be a really good resource for you. Okay, great question. Can you go over setting your own auth and token in the server to shorten the call? Oh, yes. So in your project, when you download this into VS Code, I may have it downloaded already. Let me check real quick. Hope that didn't work. Let me try another one. Okay. So this project used to be in Redux Week, but it's not anymore. This is, but the server is still the same. So don't mind all the other, the Redux references here. The server is still the same. So open up, when you clone this down, open up server.js and go to the login and just change, oh, look, I already changed it locally. Just change username equals something, password equals something. And then when you do that, you'll have to restart your server. So unless this uses nodemon, nope. Oh, let's see, that's the wrong package.json. Oh, this does use nodemon. So once you do that and save it, it should restart the server for you, but if you're getting an error, then you may need to just restart your server. So yeah, just change that inside your login post endpoint right there. I don't understand why private route is needed. Can you please repeat that? Again, it's not super necessary. It's just kind of cherry on top. All it's really doing, if we don't have, let's change this back to route. All the private route is doing is if we don't have our token here, is stopping our users from going to here. So there's other ways to handle this. You don't have to do it inside a private route. It just makes it kind of convenient. But maybe we don't want to see unauthenticated users. We don't want our unauthenticated users to see even this header stuff. Maybe we don't want them to see that. So what private route does is it's just going to, it'll go look at this protected route. If there's no token, then it'll redirect them back to login. So that it doesn't even take them to inside our application. You probably would want to hide this anyways. So we would probably just delete that. If we would hide it, not delete it. We would hide it if we're not authenticated anyways, but you'd still be able to try to go to protected. You'd be able to come up here to the URL bar and type it in and still try to get there. But with the private route, it still just logs you back or redirects you back anyways. Again, for security purposes, it's not that big of a deal because usually our data that we want secure is protected behind that authenticator middleware anyways. So you won't even be able to get any data from your request, even without this private route component. I think it just makes the user experience a little bit better, so you don't get routed somewhere and then get an error saying, oh, you're not authorized, you can't see this data. You just get routed directly back to login. Thanks for showing redirect when you're not authenticated. What about changing login redirect to / or dashboard if you are authenticated? Yeah, so inside login, we could do something like this. So we could say inside the render, or just if it's a functional component before the return, we could say if local storage dot get item if that's truthy, then we redirect that. Imported it automatically for me. Oh, but we want it from React Router DOM. Okay, redirect to whatever your endpoint is. So for us, it's protected. Oh, we need to return that. So if we're authenticated, this will return, and we won't ever hit this login form. We'll just automatically get redirected there. Oh, we need to log in first. So this should keep us here through refreshes. If we try to go to login, it'll just redirect us because we're authenticated. Looking at private route, if anyone added an item to their local storage with the key string as token, would that be sufficient to bypass the user authentication and look at all the private data? It would be sufficient to route you to the protected route, but it wouldn't bypass user authentication. You still need the token, the correct token, to make the API request. So if I go here and I go to application, and we'll just call this malicious token. So if someone knows what they're doing and can come into your local storage and create a token on the local storage and just try and guess what your token is, well, when they go to here, when they refresh the page and try and fetch data, let's look at what happened. User be logged in. Their token, their malicious token, was incorrect, so they weren't able to get the data. Sure, they can get past our private route, which again isn't a huge security boost. It's just more for user experience, but they still won't be able to get the data. Because look at the authorization header they sent. This header does not match what the server is expecting. So they can get past our private route, but they can't bypass the user authentication and look at any private data. All righty, that wraps it up for us today. So I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon, and good luck on your projects tomorrow, and I'll see you tomorrow afternoon.